On the evening of May 10, 1941, a lone aircraft crossed the North Sea toward Scotland, flown by a pilot who had no navigator, no radio contact with anyone on the ground, and no realistic plan for how he would land safely once he arrived. When the aircraft ran low on fuel over the Scottish countryside, the pilot bailed out, parachuting into a farmer's field, where he was quickly detained by a local resident who had no idea that the man he had just captured was one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany. The pilot was Rudolf Hess, deputy Führer of the Third Reich, the third most powerful man in the entire Nazi hierarchy, officially designated as Adolf Hitler's own successor should anything happen to Hitler himself. He had flown alone, without authorization, without informing Hitler in advance, on a mission he believed could end the war between Germany and Britain within days. Instead, he spent the remainder of the war, and much of the rest of his life, in captivity, his exact motives still debated by historians more than 8 decades later. This is the true story of one of the strangest, most genuinely mysterious episodes of the entire Second World War. A story that begins with a member of Hitler's innermost circle deciding entirely on his own initiative to fly directly into enemy territory. To understand why Hess made this extraordinary decision, it helps to understand both his personal position within the Nazi hierarchy and the broader strategic situation facing Germany in the spring of 1941. Hess had been one of Adolf Hitler's earliest and most devoted followers, joining the Nazi movement in its earliest years during the 1920s and playing a significant role in the party's rise to power, eventually being rewarded with the position of Deputy Führer, a title that placed him formally second only to Hermann Göring in the official Nazi line of succession, and that reflected Hitler's own personal trust in Hess's unwavering loyalty. By 1941, however, Hess's actual practical influence within the Nazi government had been steadily declining relative to other senior figures, including Göring himself and Heinrich Himmler, whose control over the SS and German security apparatus had made him an increasingly central figure in Nazi governance. Hess, despite his formal rank and title, found himself increasingly sidelined from the actual centers of military and political decision-making, a development that some historians believe contributed to his motivation for undertaking such a dramatic, independent action, potentially reflecting a genuine desire to demonstrate his continued relevance and value to Hitler and the broader Nazi cause through a single, dramatic personal achievement. The broader strategic context facing Germany in the spring of 1941 also appears to have played a significant role in Hess's thinking. Germany had by this point achieved a series of remarkable military victories across continental Europe, but remained at war with Britain, which continued to resist despite the fall of France and the broader collapse of Allied resistance across Western Europe the previous year. Hitler was, at the same moment, actively preparing for the massive invasion of the Soviet Union that would begin only weeks later, an operation that German military planners understood carried enormous risk if Germany remained simultaneously engaged in active conflict with Britain, potentially forcing Germany into precisely the kind of two-front war that German military strategists had long recognized as one of the most dangerous possible strategic situations the country could find itself in. Hess appears to have genuinely believed, based on his own reading of British politics and his personal, if largely superficial, familiarity with certain British aristocratic figures he believed might be sympathetic to a negotiated peace, that meaningful elements within the British establishment remained open to ending the war with Germany, provided the right approach and the right intermediary could successfully open a channel for genuine negotiation. Specifically, Hess had become convinced that a British aristocrat named the Duke of Hamilton, whom Hess had never actually personally met but had learned about through secondhand contacts and, according to some accounts, through actual misidentification based on confused intelligence about Hamilton's political sympathies, might serve as a receptive contact capable of facilitating direct negotiations between Hess and senior figures within the British government, potentially including individuals who Hess believed might be interested in removing Winston Churchill from power in favor of a government more open to negotiating peace with Germany. This belief reflected a significant and ultimately catastrophic misreading of the actual British political and strategic situation in 1941. While it was true that a small number of British political figures had, in earlier years, expressed varying degrees of sympathy toward avoiding war with Germany or exploring the possibility of a negotiated peace, by May 1941, following the sustained trauma of the Blitz and Britain's continued determined resistance under Churchill's leadership, any realistic political appetite for negotiating with Nazi Germany had effectively evaporated within the actual British government. A reality that Hess, working from outdated or simply inaccurate intelligence and personal assumptions, rather than any genuine current understanding of British politics, appears to have failed to fully appreciate. Convinced nonetheless that his mission carried genuine potential to fundamentally alter the course of the war, Hess began secretly preparing for his flight over a period of months, undertaking extensive personal flight training specifically to prepare himself for the demanding technical challenge of piloting a long-range aircraft solo across hostile airspace. A genuinely difficult undertaking, given that Hess, despite having some prior flying experience from decades earlier, had not maintained the kind of consistent recent flight training that such a demanding, high-stakes mission would ordinarily require. Hess arranged to have a specially modified Messerschmitt Bf-110 aircraft made available to him, ostensibly for testing or training purposes, without revealing to those who authorized the arrangement the actual purpose he intended for the aircraft. On the evening of May 10, 1941, Hess departed from an airfield in Germany, flying alone across occupied Europe and the North Sea towards Scotland, a flight that pushed both the aircraft's fuel capacity and Hess's own limited recent flying experience to their absolute practical limits. Hess's flight plan called for him to reach the vicinity of the Duke of Hamilton's estate in Scotland, parachute from the aircraft once he had exhausted his fuel supply, rather than attempting the far more technically demanding task of actually landing the aircraft safely at night without any ground support or clear landing site, and then present himself to Hamilton directly, believing that Hamilton would recognize the significance of his arrival and facilitate the kind of high-level diplomatic contact Hess believed his mission required. The actual execution of this plan proved considerably messier than Hess's preparation had anticipated. Running low on fuel as he approached the Scottish coast, and struggling with both the physical demands of the long solo flight and the technical challenge of locating his intended destination in the darkness without reliable navigation assistance, Hess ultimately bailed out of his aircraft over the Scottish countryside. Parachuting into a field near the town of Eaglesham, considerably short of his intended precise destination, near Hamilton's actual estate. Hess was quickly discovered by a local farmer, David McLean, who encountered the injured, disoriented German officer shortly after his landing and took Hess into his home, and contacted local authorities with considerable presence of mind given the genuinely bizarre circumstances of encountering an apparent enemy pilot who had just parachuted into his field. Hess, who spoke reasonably fluent English, identified himself using an assumed name initially, requesting specifically to be taken to see the Duke of Hamilton. A request that, given the circumstances, understandably generated considerable confusion and suspicion among the local authorities and Home Guard personnel, who quickly arrived to take the mysterious German pilot into custody. It took British authorities a considerable amount of time, extending over the following day, to properly verify Hess's actual identity and to fully comprehend the extraordinary reality that the German prisoner now in British custody was, in fact, one of the most senior figures in the entire Nazi government. A revelation that, once confirmed, generated genuine shock and considerable strategic confusion within the highest levels of the British government regarding how to properly respond to such an entirely unprecedented situation. The Duke of Hamilton himself, when eventually brought to meet with Hess following the confirmation of his identity, reported that he had no meaningful prior personal relationship or communication with Hess whatsoever. directly contradicting whatever assumptions or intelligence had led Hess to believe that Hamilton represented a genuinely receptive, prepared contact for the kind of high-level peace negotiations Hess had traveled to Scotland specifically to initiate. This meeting appears to have represented the first clear indication to British officials that Hess's entire mission had been based on a fundamentally mistaken, poorly informed understanding of British political realities, rather than reflecting any genuine, coordinated diplomatic opening that senior British officials had actually been anticipating or preparing for. News of Hess's arrival and capture presented British Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his government with a genuinely delicate and unusual strategic and propaganda situation. On one hand, the capture of such a senior Nazi official offered obvious potential intelligence and propaganda value, demonstrating apparent internal instability or desperation within the highest levels of the Nazi government. On the other hand, British officials needed to carefully manage public and international messaging around the incident to avoid either overstating its significance in ways that might later prove embarrassing or understating it in ways that might fail to capture whatever genuine strategic value the situation actually offered. Churchill's government ultimately decided to treat Hess as a prisoner of war rather than engaging in any serious diplomatic negotiation based on whatever peace proposals Hess had traveled to Scotland hoping to present, a decision that effectively ended any realistic prospect that Hess's mission might achieve its original intended purpose. Hess was interrogated extensively by British intelligence officials in the weeks and months following his capture, providing various accounts of his motivations and the specific peace terms he had hoped to negotiate, though British officials generally concluded that Hess's understanding of actual British political conditions and appetite for negotiation had been substantially detached from reality, reinforcing the assessment that his mission reflected a genuine, if catastrophically misguided, personal initiative rather than any coordinated official German peace overture that senior Nazi leadership had actually authorized or anticipated. Adolf Hitler's own reaction to news of Hess's flight, once it reached Berlin, reportedly combined genuine shock with considerable concern regarding how the incident might be perceived, both domestically within Germany and by international observers. German officials publicly characterized Hess's flight as the act of a mentally unstable individual acting entirely without authorization, a characterization that served the German government's immediate need to distance itself from any implication that Hess's mission reflected any genuine, sanctioned German peace initiative. While also reflecting what may have been genuine uncertainty within the highest levels of German leadership regarding Hess's actual mental state and motivations at the time he undertook his flight. This official German characterization of Hess as mentally unstable, combined with the genuinely bizarre and unprecedented nature of his mission, has contributed to decades of subsequent historical debate and speculation regarding Hess's actual psychological state, his precise motivations, and the broader question of whether his flight reflected purely his own independent initiative, or whether it might have connected, in ways that have never been definitively established, to broader German strategic considerations regarding the war with Britain that senior officials preferred not to publicly acknowledge. This uncertainty has been further complicated by the fact that many relevant German government records from this period were destroyed or lost during the war's final chaotic months, leaving historians without the kind of comprehensive documentary evidence that might otherwise help definitively resolve these lingering questions about Hess's actual motivations and whether any other senior German officials had prior knowledge of his intentions. Hess remained in British custody for the remainder of the war, held under conditions of considerable secrecy and security given his unique status, and the ongoing uncertainty regarding how his continued presence in British custody might be exploited for propaganda purposes by either side of the conflict. Following Germany's defeat in 1945, Hess was among the senior Nazi officials tried at the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, where he was convicted on charges related to crimes against peace. Though notably acquitted of the more severe charges related to war crimes and crimes against humanity that resulted in death sentences for several of his co-defendants. a distinction that reflected both the specific nature of the charges prosecutors were able to substantiate against him and the fact that his actual direct involvement in the most severe atrocities of the Nazi regime appeared, based on available evidence, to have been considerably more limited than that of several other senior officials tried alongside him.
Hess was sentenced to life imprisonment following his conviction at Nuremberg, and he spent the remainder of his life incarcerated at Spandau prison in Berlin, eventually becoming the facility's sole remaining prisoner, following the release of his fellow convicted Nazi officials in the following decades.
A genuinely unusual circumstance that resulted in an entire, elaborately staffed prison facility being maintained for the ongoing incarceration of a single aging prisoner. Hess died in Spandau prison in 1987 at the age of 93, with an official investigation concluding that his death resulted from suicide, a conclusion that has itself remained subject to some degree of ongoing historical dispute and alternative theories, though the official finding has generally been accepted by most mainstream historians who have examined the available evidence. The full, definitive truth regarding Hess's actual motivations and the precise question of whether any other senior figures within the Nazi government had advanced knowledge or involvement in his planning remains even today, more than 8 decades after his flight, a subject of genuine ongoing historical debate, rather than settled, universally agreed historical fact. Various theories have been proposed over the years, ranging from the relatively straightforward explanation that Hess acted entirely on his own initiative, motivated by a combination of genuine ideological conviction and personal ambition to restore his declining political relevance within the Nazi hierarchy, to considerably more elaborate theories suggesting broader German strategic calculation, or even, in some of the more speculative theories that have circulated over the decades, questions regarding whether the individual held in British custody throughout the following decades was in fact genuinely Hess himself. Theories that most mainstream historians have generally dismissed as lacking credible supporting evidence, but that nonetheless reflect just how much genuine uncertainty and historical intrigue continues to surround this singularly strange episode of the Second World War. What remains clear and well documented, regardless of these ongoing uncertainties regarding his precise motivations, is the genuinely remarkable, almost difficult to believe basic sequence of events themselves. One of the most senior officials in the entire Nazi government, the second-in-line successor to Adolf Hitler himself, choosing to personally pilot a solo, entirely unauthorized flight deep into enemy territory, based on his own independent judgment regarding a peace mission that senior British officials would ultimately reveal had been built on a foundation of substantially mistaken assumptions regarding British political realities. A mission that ended not with the historic peace negotiation Hess had apparently envisioned, but with a confused Scottish farmer discovering an injured, disoriented Nazi official in his field, beginning a chain of events that would keep Hess in captivity for the remainder of his long, genuinely unusual life. This has been Forgotten Frontlines. Every story we bring you is researched, written, and brought to life by the V-Team, because some battles deserve to be remembered, no matter how strange, no matter how forgotten. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more forgotten stories from the front lines of the past. We'll see you in the next one.